Okay, thank you. Well, good afternoon. My name is Dean DeBolt, and I'm a head of the archive, University Archivist, University of West Florida. And this is another in our series of stories from the archives. Um, what we do is we bring you stories about things that in our collection, but things that are greater stories in themselves. And we thought, and to start off, our talk today is going to be on kudzu, how West Florida infected the South. And I usually start off by mentioning that we are the West Florida History Center and University Archives and part of the John C. Pace Library, University of West Florida. And our purpose here is to collect, preserve, and make available materials about West Florida region, its history, and people. And we do this by acquiring books and maps and personal papers of individuals and their family. We have congressional records of three of our congressmen from Washington. Um, and we have a lot of donations of different kinds of material, newspapers and the like. That frankly is not a subject about West Florida that we cannot provide research and help on. Um, and but, we always encourage people to come and visit us, write us, send us email. We will do what we can to help people in their research. Well, today we're talking about kudzu, history of the vine that I call ate the South. It's going to leave you in awe, uh, if you pardon the pun. We begin with this man, Carl Peter Thunberg. Now, he was born in Uppsala, Sweden, and he got a medical doctorate in 1772. The subjects he studied were philosophy, theology, medicine, and chemistry. But his real interests were in natural history and medicine. And this engraving that appeared in the book shows some of the botany things around him, because that was mainly his interest. From 1770 to about 1779, he traveled throughout Europe and the Far East, and he studied plants and he gave advice. He did service as a surgeon on ships. After traveling for 9 years, he returned to Uppsala, Sweden in 1779, and he spent the rest of his life here in this picture at Uppsala University and served as a botany professor and then later chair of botany. He built up the university botanical collection and built a garden, a herbarium, and a museum using many of the plants he found on his travels. Now, for our story today, he traveled to Japan. He made a trip on the Dutch East India Company ship to Japan in 1771. Now, only the Dutch could trade with Japan at this point. Now, the Dutch and the Portuguese could only trade with Japan by using an artificial island off Nagasaki, Japan, called Tsushima. They were to prevent and really forbid foreigners from having any contact with Japanese people. Every ship coming in was inspected. Its sails were held by the Japanese, so it wasn't free to go except by their permission, and they confiscated religious books and weapons. So this little island, this little fake island, was the only place that foreigners to Japan could be at, and then there was a strictly controlled bridge right there to prevent foreigners from contact with Japan and Japanese citizens. Now, we don't really know how Thunberg was able to collect plants, especially Japanese plants. Some people suggest he used a disguise to leave the island. We do know that occasionally physicians were called upon to visit high-ranking Japanese patients with permission of the authorities, and there was some exchange of culture. For example, we do know that the Dutch introduced tomato, chocolate, and clover to Japan. Now, under Japanese law, only 2 Dutch ships were allowed each year. And this all changed with the arrival of U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry who was sent by Millard Fillmore to force the opening of Japan to foreign commerce in 1853. But anyway, back to Thunberg. One of the plants he discovered was a tiny vine with tiny flowers, and he gave it the name Praeria thunbergiana, and its formal name was kudzu. Today, it is known as a variety known today is called Praeria montana or Praeria lobata, or often simply just called kudzu. And we do know from Japanese history that one of the earliest medicinal plants used in Japanese medicine, and it was used primarily to treat alcohol abuse. And this is a Japanese woodblock showing workers harvesting kudzu in 1877. And they would harvest the plant and they would turn it into a powder or to a liquid that could be used in medicine. Now, the powder from the root have been used to treat alcohol abuse, although we really don't know what the medicinal mechanical mechanism is that makes it work, and it's still unknown, but it's still being used, and it's been radical research as recently as 10 years ago, and one can actually buy some of the tablets of kudzu powder in health food stores or order it, and it's considered helpful for the effects of headaches, upset stomachs, dizziness, and other things. But back to our history of how West Florida managed to infest the South. In 1876, the United States held its Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, 150 years ago this year. And it was a large fair to commemorate America's 100th anniversary. And there was American history, inventions, and accomplishments were sold. There were exhibits, but there were also a series of exhibits of other countries, including Japan, which had only been open to the West for 23 years. And one of the things that they showed in their little exhibit, in their outside exhibit booth, they showed off gardens, plants, and other materials. One of the plants they had was kudzu, and it was being promoted as a foliage plant, and it was promoted as a ground cover here at the Japanese pavilion at the 1876 Centennial Exposition. And because of this, some of the there were articles that appeared in papers around the country after this exposition talking about Japan and its kudzu fiber, which often sometimes was used for making a paper, it noted. And so kudzu was introduced to this country at our Centennial Exposition 150 years ago. One of the Florida periodical noted that that starch could be gotten from the plant, and they discovered it as a beautiful plant spreading over neighboring bushes and trees with luxuriant foliage, just perfect for the warm climate. Now we do know that kudzu plant did spread throughout the Northeast because we have evidence, and I'll show you some of that in a minute. But here, our West Florida story began in 1860, in the 1880s, I mean. Sometime in the 1880s, a Quaker couple, Mr. and Mrs. Charles E. Pleve, immigrated to Chipley, Florida from Indiana. Now, Mr. Pleve had been engaged in agriculture and farming, and he had also had a personal hobby of photography. And we have many of his photographs here in the library. And so he often took just normal photographs, which today we would call really artistic, but they just showed normal scenes and normal life. This one showed woman feeding chicken. That's the title of it. It could be Mrs. Pleve. We really do not know, but this is an example of the kind of photograph that he would take. He often took pictures of objects, of native flowers, grasshoppers, and so forth. Now, this is a time that you used glass plate negatives, and the camera, you had to leave the camera lens open long enough to get an exposure. So some of the pictures he took, especially of the animals or bugs, were are really exquisite and really incredible that they stood still long enough for him to get a picture. This is one of my favorites. It's kind of silly. It's called Family in a Tree. We call it Family in a Tree. We don't know who the family is. We don't know why they're all up in the tree. But, for genealogists, they call this a family tree picture. But this is the kind of one of my favorite whimsical pictures in the Plea photograph collection. Now, around 1902, there uh, There are, in 1902, Please heard about the kudzu seeds and ordered some from Japan. And he planted them, but they didn't do very well. And well, the second year they did better, but he was not pleased with it and he threw it away. And what he did was he threw it away into the compost pile from their garden. In fact, he reported years later in this little article about how he tried them and it didn't do very good, and he just decided to get rid of it. And his wife talked him into he threw it in the compost pile, and he began noticing it started growing well in the compost pile. Pretty soon it overtook the compost pile, began to spread to the shed, and then he found some of his horses some of his animals eagerly munching it. By fall in 1905, Cleve noted that the vine had covered the 50 by 80 foot of space between his garden barn, the drive, and the neighbor's house. He decided to send a sample to Tallahassee, to the state agricultural department in Florida for inspection. And the results were, they came back and said, this is a pretty favorable plant. It's very high in the protein. It got starch and sugar, fiber, and all. And they said it ranks right up there with some of the other feed things that we use for animals. He called this kudzu hay, and he thought it would be a really good thing for the animals and farmers to have. Now, he's not the only one extolling the virtues of kudzu. And in the North and Northwest, they were also mentioning it. And so this is a magazine called Our Country Home 1907, and it shows a house, and it shows the planting of the kudzu, what it looks like in the middle of May, and what it looks like in September. But Plebe probably didn't know, having become accustomed to Florida, that in the North and Northeast, the cold winter killed this plant. It actually died out. And so you could plant it, or it would either replant itself or start again, but it didn't overtake things because it would die out. And that didn't happen in Florida. That didn't happen with our wonderful climate here. They described it in the North as in very happy, pleasant term. It bound upward and onward over all obstacles, and arriving at the window ledge, reaching the awning, and still not content till the roof be scaled, and it can see, the plant can see what is beyond. And so there's another quote here. I'm sure it must have been the kudzu vine, which the fairy planted by the house of Sleeping Beauty, and it grew and grew and covered the house. And the kudzu it just mentioned is such romantic and happy and carefree and fairy tale term. From the Minneapolis newspaper in 1908, I found this ad where they were selling it at the local store, and they were telling other people about how the pretty little vine would cover your garden walls and celebrate your garden. But we do have to remember that he did not realize that it did not. He just did not know, apparently did not know something that northern gardeners know. The plant died with frost and winter. So Fleet began to get excited about this plant. He wrote a large article for a magazine called the Florida East Coast Homeseeker. This is 1908. This is the time that people are being urged to move to Florida to buy land. Flagler Railroad had come down the East Coast. He built these lavish hotels in St. Augustine and along the coast and heading on down toward Miami. And it's a time of if you want to get away from the cold winters, you now could. You could get on the train. You could come down here. You could buy a plot of land fairly on the cheap. Well, this magazine was one of those magazines pushing that. So he wrote an article about the kudzu vine, and he talked about how wonderful it is and how useful and all. And as a result of these things, people started writing him saying, "Hey, some? Can we have some seeds? Can we get some seeds and things for you?" Well, this was a photograph around 1908 of his kudzu nursery in Chipley, Florida, where he's commercially growing kudzu plants and then selling the seed by mail, cutting by the mail, and shipping them all over the South. He even had published a little brochure and he published this in the local newspaper in Chipley, Florida, and then he printed this out and handed it out, and he called it the greatest forage. I've got some spelling errors here. Greatest forage plant known in 1908. And so he is just really promoting that. He got letterhead that he included that phrase. He said, "Note that it's better than cowpea, velvet bean, and red cloverhead hay, the kind of plant people were feeding to their animals and kinds of things." And I even found this in our collection. When one time Pensacola attorney William A. Blunt, and one time senatorial candidate, he began planning his formal garden for his mansion called Seamarch, which is an area today next to the Pensacola Country Club. Why, of course, he wrote to Chipley to get some kudzu to plant in his wonderful garden to help it look beautiful and green and everything. He's not the only one promoting. Please continue to crusade for this plant. And this is an ad from the Birmingham, Alabama newspaper about this wonderful plant that it just grows and it's just wonderful and pretty and all that. And he continued to crusade for this wonderful plant, kudzu. By 1934, the U.S. United States Soil Service was recommending it for soil coverage, and they published these little bulletins urging people to use it and to grow it and include it. And we all now know the results of those efforts. In other words, out of the cultivation of gardens and planting and all, the kudzu overgrew these, and today it covers large swaths of the South. And indeed, Chipley was unable to keep up with all the orders. He noted that he could not even keep up with all of the orders that people were ordering kudzu from him. And this is a 1982 map, and it shows the infestation of kudzu throughout the southern states of the United States. A large part of it coming from Cleve's business throughout the South, but also forwarding his seeds and planting to commercial nurseries and other places. And he got so many orders, and he began to almost nearly lost everything with the Great Depression all, and eventually the kudzu grew out of control. And in Chipley, Florida, they still celebrate his efforts at kudzu. They have marked his grave marker as a kudzu pioneer, and he is and a historical marker have been brought here and placed here honoring kudzu. Of course, the marker is not covered with kudzu, which strikes me as something that would be very appropriate for this kind of thing. And kudzu began entering the popular culture. So there's one of the comic book, Doug Marlett have a book called Gone with the Kudzu, and the book of kudzu appears a thing on medicines and all that. but we do recognize it now as a noxious, as a weed, um, and even the United Nations has it on their list of weeds. And unfortunately, many times our mild Florida winters are simply not killing it, and it continues to grow. And so the next time you're driving through the Kudzu covered valleys and hills of Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia and Louisiana, you can remember to thank West Florida, and you can remember to thank our Kudzu pioneer, Charles Cleves of Shipley, Florida. And thank you very much for listening today, and I hope you enjoyed this story about how we infested the South from West Florida. Does anyone have any question? Maybe maybe we should celebrate by getting some kudzu plants around the library and letting it grow up over the building. I think that might cut down our air conditioning bill, maybe too. I don't know, but anyway, so thank you all very much, and we'll. This was April. We kind of skip our story from the archive until school starts again in August and September. So I'll probably see you then. So thank you all, and goodbye.